Yagati Chinna Rao, our esteemed convener, Dr. Gopinath Pillai sir, our head of department, Dr. Indrajit Singh sir. I would also like to welcome our respected members and amicable audience for gracing and adding lustre to this webinar on Understanding Social Exclusion Theories and Praxis, organized by Civil Society. Civil Society is an academic society of Department of Political Science of Sri Guru Nanak Dev Khalsa College, formed by the students of the college to promote and spread the practical reality of politics and promote awareness among the students about social, political, and geopolitical scenarios in India. In pursuit of this endeavor, the society is actively engaged in promoting and spreading political literacy by holding conferences, webinars, seminars by renowned speakers, and they are also invited to deliver lectures, and group discussions are held on a regular basis. Now, I feel profusely elated to welcome our distinguished convener, Dr. Gopinath Pillai sir, and I request him to kindly start the session with his words of wisdom and encouragement. Over to you, sir.
Unmute yourself, sir.
Sir, your mic is mute.
You have to unmute.
Yeah, that's the handicap that I have in dealing with technology. Sir, I'm saying good morning to all of you, and especially to Professor Rao. So it's really our honor to have you in the college. I think it's for the first time, and I will thank Bhavna for doing that favor to us. When I heard this topic, social exclusion, it pains me that even after 75 years, we have to speak on this topic, social exclusion. That shows the kind of developmental policies that this country has been following. I think there is some serious problem. And when we are celebrating this Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav, and the slogan that the government is given out, that it's Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas. So in this context of Sabka Saath, this social exclusion is something which is totally contradictory to Sabka Saath. Sabka Saath, I believe, means inclusion. But it is really sad to know that the reality is far from what we think. And I'm so glad that my students will get an opportunity to learn from you, including me. I'll get an opportunity to learn about this social exclusion. But I'm sure my students understand what is social exclusion. Just to give them, because a one-line definition, that it's a process through which individuals or groups are excluded from facilities, benefits, and opportunities. So the concept is not very difficult, but the reasons behind this social exclusion is quite tough to understand. There are customs, social customs, which have been responsible for this social exclusion. The kind of economic structure that we have in this country is also responsible for this social exclusion. Lack of opportunities, illiteracy. I mean, there are so many factors which have led to this whole melee called social exclusion. But I'm not an expert on that, so I will not be brave enough to say anything on that. But definitely we have an understanding of social exclusion. And after having heard the professor, we will have clarity in our mind about that. So, sir, without wasting time, sir, you please start with your lecture. They are my students, and I hope that you will simplify it so that they understand the...
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, sir, for the introductory remarks. And I'll try my best to simplify it. And to the Honorable Principal and teacher colleagues and students, good morning to you all. At the very outset, I'm thankful to the civil society, Department of Political Science, Khalsa College, University of Delhi, and particularly Dr. Gopinath Pillai and Ms. Shivani Rai and Dr. Bhavna Sharma for extending the invitation. Although I don't claim to be an expert on the subject, but I shall make use of this opportunity to share some of my thoughts and research on the subject. And this lecture deals with the debate centered around the concept of social exclusion, which has become central to the newer discipline that has in recent years gained significance within the social science in India, predicated on the vigorous intercontinental and interdisciplinary framework. This discipline, still in its formative stage, has immense potential in crucial revisionist interventions, in exploring and conceptualizing political economy, and statist interventions in religion in relation to groups excluded and marginalized in different forms of traditional structures and modern practices of governmentality that have been subjected to many omissions in traditional disciplines. Also significant is the possibilities it offers in understanding the challenges from the peripheries and the bottom, and a deeper engagement with the epistemic modes vital for critical re-examination of ideological underpinnings and the political structures or processes, especially given the wide reckoning inherent relationship between cognitive justice and social justice. In this presentation, my lecture locates the framing of the concept of social exclusion with the broader context while paying attention to its grounding within the Indian context and in relation to particular mode of exclusion of the largest marginalized group, that is which I was specialized, Dalits, that constitutes 18% of Indian population. Social exclusion is construed as the denial of equal opportunities, as just now Dr. Gopinath Pillai sir stressed the point. So denial of opportunities imposed by some groups of the society on certain groups, leading to a state of inability of an individual to participate in the basic political, economic, and social functioning of the society. The term social exclusion is so evocative, ambiguous, multidimensional, and expansive that it can be defined in different ways. However, the difficulty of defining exclusion and the fact that it is interpreted differently in different contexts at different times is a given theoretical opportunity. Rather than a single definition of exclusion, it is interesting to understand the disputes surrounding around exclusion and its usage in different contexts. By tracing the history of the idea and decoding the multiple meanings of the term social exclusion, the term social exclusion as it is foregrounded emerged in the late 20th century in Europe as a key concept among the analysts and policymakers seeking to understand and formulate directives of approaches to alleviate some of the negative social effects on economic restructuring. Thus, the term has an evident appeal for politicians and policy analysts. In Western Europe, those meanings are embedded in the emergence of the term French political rhetoric and the specific institutional history of the European Union. The term social exclusion was originally coined in France in 1974. It refers to various categories of people who were not protected by the social insurance at the time and labeled as social problems, identified as mentally and physically handicapped, suicidal people, aged invalids, abused children, substance abusers, single parents, and multi-problem households, marginal, asocial persons, and other social misfits, they call it. However, in the 1980s, this stigmatizing and narrow view of social exclusion were superseded the term because central to French debates about the nature of the neo-poverty associated with the technological changes and economic restructuring. The social exclusion in this context was not simply equated with poverty, but was broadened to refer to a process of social disintegration in the sense of progressive rupture of the relationship between individual and society, which was occurring due to increasing long-term unemployment, particularly unskilled workers and immigrants. The inability of younger people to enter the labor market, greater family instability, and isolated single members of households, increasing housing settlements, increasing number of homeless people, rising tensions, and periodic violence in the low-cost housing settlements on the peripheries of cities, what we call it urban slums in India. This dissipation of the social fabric of society seemed to be a consequence of long-term process of transformation in the structure and organization of economic life. So what are the social exclusion theories and models that we have? There are about 5 schools of thoughts or models that are available to us and mostly developed while studying racial discrimination in US by the economists to begin with and later joined by psychologists. The methodology that was employed to study the racial discrimination was applied to study caste discrimination in India. What is the rationale for the upper caste discriminating against the Dalits? The theories are, in 1957, Gary Becker offered a rationale in response to a similar question that the white males discriminate against their black counterparts because they have a taste for discrimination from which they derive utility. And this taste emanates from prejudices that an individual from one group holds against the individuals of another group. In this case, blacks and women. After that, in 1973, Kenneth Arrow formulated the belief theory to grasp the validation of discrimination. The people discriminate because they believe or perceive that people from another group are, on an average, less productive. Therefore, they make their decisions about the hiring and wages for the other group members based on the belief, which may be wrong and may result in a discriminatory outcome. In 2010, yet another theory put forwarded by George Akerlof along with Rachel Cranton brought in social categories or social identities and their norms into realm of economic decisions. The identity theory postulates that cultural norms determine how individuals in a group behave towards others, as individual choices are socially framed. In its application to this race and poverty, the identity theory implies that the behavior of whites towards the blacks is determined by group norms, which perpetuate a distinction of us and them. The whites thinks of blacks as them rather than including in the category of we all or us all. This division of norms based on us and them are what authors call it oppositional identity of results of discrimination. In the taste, belief, and identity theories, the discrimination results from prejudice, which is embedded in an individual psychology. Social psychologists have also provided further insights into the causes of prejudice and motive of discrimination. Gordon Allport treats prejudice primarily as something which is rooted in individual psychology. Psychology of prejudice produces stereotypical false beliefs among the dominant group and discriminatory behavior towards the subordinate group, a view that is similar to taste theory. Herbert Blumer questions Gordon Allport's theoretical construct of prejudice as a set of individual feelings and argues that race prejudice exists in the sense that group position rather than a set of individual feelings which members of one racial group towards other members of another racial group. Blumer shifts locus of origin of prejudice from individual belief to attitudes of on the grounds about the relative status of material benefits associated with the membership in the group, harboring stereotypical beliefs towards the other. The extent to which the dominant group perpetuate advantage for their own and disadvantage for subordinate groups is a crucial factor for the group outcomes. In Blumer's notion of prejudice, there are four basic types of feelings, attitudes that always seem to be present in the race prejudice by the dominant group: a sense of superiority, a feeling of the subordinate race is intrinsically different and alien, a feeling of proprietary claim to certain areas of privilege and advantage, and perhaps the most important, a feeling of fear that the subordinate race harbors designs on the prerogative of dominant race. Thus, Blumer shifts the axis of prejudice away from individual sentiments towards the collective interests of the maintaining a relative group interest. The focus on the group position and group efforts rather than on individual efforts for a material interest and high social status. Prejudice becomes an operative, mobilizing instrument for preserving the advantaged position of a dominant group. There are real material interests at stake in the efforts of the dominant group to preserve its privileged position, and also more intangible and psychic benefits of the high status advantage. Building on this, William Darity and others brought further insights to the role of economic and material interest in shaping the racial identity norms. Racial identity norms are shaped by the relative income gains from racial or non-racial or mixed strategy of social interaction. Identity norms are determined by the relative income gains or productivity of identity norms in the societal interaction from each of the identity norms. The most significant aspect of this theory is that by bringing the relative income gains into norm formation of a racist, secular, and mixed identity in social interactions, it captures the underlying conditions that brings change from racial norms to individual norms or non-racist norms and mixed norms of discrimination and makes the theory dynamic in nature. These propounded theorists suggest that social exclusion and discrimination is a group concept based on group identities such as race, color, religion, ethnicity, caste, or gender. In case of group exclusion, all individuals from the group are excluded due to their social identity, irrespective of the economic standing of the individual within a social group, thereby making discrimination neutral to economic status. For instance, untouchables face discrimination in India based on their caste identity, irrespective of their financial status, as people belonging to the higher caste do not make any distinction between economically weak and better off among the discriminated group. Therefore, policies to provide safeguards against the discrimination, such as affirmative action or a reservation, are based on the social identity of the group rather than that of an individual. If discrimination is neutral to economic status, the criteria for legal safeguards and policies have to be caste and not economic status of an individual within a group. Addressing social exclusion requires a holistic approach which promotes the involvement of excluded populations in community life, ensuring access to basic services, promote behavioral change, increase in income, and address other key elements of exclusion. Discrimination is a particular kind of exclusion that it can take either an active or a passive form. Active exclusion through discrimination which will see agents systematically refusing to hire or accept the participation of members, a social group, despite their formal qualifications or even overqualifications sometimes, while routinely favoring members of group who are equally or even less qualified. The consequences of this discrimination can lead to deprivation indirectly. The passive discrimination, in which the discouragement and low self-confidence result in poor performance, or through direct routes that limits access to income or education that is mobility enhancing. In social science literature, there is a general agreement that core features of social exclusion, its principal indicators, and the way it relates to poverty and inequality. The development in social science literature enables us to comprehend the meanings and manifestations of the concept of social exclusion and its applicability to caste and ethnicity-based exclusion in India. The concept of social exclusion, thus, essentially refers to the process through which groups wholly or partially excluded from full participation in the society in which they live. It emphasizes two crucial dimensions involving the notion of exclusion, namely the societal institutions, or the outcome in terms of a deprivation. To understand the dimensions of exclusion, it is necessary to explore the societal interactions and institutions which lead to exclusion of certain groups and deprivation in multiple spheres, that is, civil, cultural, political, and economic. Thus, for a broader understanding of the concept of exclusion, the insight into the societal processes and institutions of exclusion are as important as outcome in terms of deprivation for certain groups. Amartya Sen refers to various meanings and manifestations of social exclusion, particularly concerning the causes or the process of discrimination and deprivation in a given society. Exclusion could occur through direct exclusion, violating a fair norms of exclusion, that is unfavorable exclusion, or through inclusion, but under unfavorable conditions. Again, violating the fair norms of inclusion, that is unfavorable inclusion, or through deliberate governmental policies, that is active exclusion, and through unintended attempts and circulate the circumstances of passive exclusion, or the exclusion caused through inability of some persons, which compared to other persons, that is constitutive relevance. The mainstream economists have further elaborated the concept of discrimination that operates particularly through markets. Societal exclusion and the social exclusion can occur in a variety of ways, and it is important to recognize the versatility of the idea and its reach. How does it apply to in India, and how do we look at in the Indian context? In India, the exclusion is embedded in societal interactions and institutions that exclude, discriminate, isolate, and deprive some groups based on group identities, such as caste and ethnicity. The nature of exclusion revolves around the caste system, particularly needs to be understood and conceptualized. The fundamental characteristics of the caste system is based on fixed civil, cultural, and economic rights of each caste, with restrictions for a change implying forced exclusion of one caste from the rights of another caste, or from undertaking occupations of other castes. Exclusion and discrimination in civil, cultural, particularly in economic spheres such as occupation and labor employment, is therefore internal to the system and a necessary outcome of its governing principles. In the market economy framework, the occupational immobility would operate through restrictions in various markets such as land, labor, credit, other inputs, and services necessary for any economic activity. Labor, being an integral part of a production process of any economic activity, would obviously suffer market discrimination. The caste identity, however, has been a dominant factor in the discourse of social exclusion. The social stigmatization of Dalits, the unique characteristic of the caste identity, makes them vulnerable to social exclusion in multiple realms of society. They suffer the most from an unequal assignment, entitlement of rights and opportunities, physical and social segregation, denial of freedom, restricted social participation, and deprivation of many social privileges. In the course of fulfilling their rights and privileges, they often experience caste-based discrimination and violence. These human rights violations have been an endemic feature of Indian society, have initiated several debates and discussions in the contemporary India. Amartya Sen draws attention to various meanings and dimensions to concept of social exclusion. He draws a distinction between situations where some people are kept out or left out and where some people are included forcibly on deeply unfavorable terms and unfavorable inclusion, namely through differential treatment in terms of conditions of contract, which would reflect discrimination in the prices changed and received by the discriminated groups. This can be inclusive of the price of factor inputs and consumer goods, price of factor of production, such as wages for labor, value of the land or rent on the land, interest on the capital, rent on the residential houses, charges or fee on services such as water and electricity. The discriminated groups can get lower prices for the goods they sell, and they could pay higher prices for the goods they buy as compared to the market price or the price paid by other groups. Amartya Sen argues that it is important to distinguish between active exclusion, that is, fostering of exclusion through deliberate policy of interventions by the government, or any other willful agents to exclude some people from the opportunity, and the passive exclusion, which works through social process in which there are no deliberate attempts to exclude, but may result in exclusion from the set of circumstances. Sen further distinguishes the constitutive relevance of exclusion from the instrumental importance. In the former, that is constitutive relevance, the exclusion or a deprivation have an intrinsic importance of their own. For instance, not being able to relate to the others or take part in the life of the community can directly impoverish a person's life, in addition to the further deprivation it may generate. This is difficult from a social exclusion of instrumental importance, where the exclusion in itself is not impoverishing, but can lead to the impoverishment of human life. Secondly, the exclusion and discrimination can occur in terms of access to social needs supplied by the government or public institutions, or by private institutions in education, housing, and health, including common resources such as water bodies, grazing land, and other land of common use. Fourthly, the group, particularly the untouchables, may face discrimination from participation in certain category of jobs, the sweeper being excluded from inside the household job because of the notion of purity and pollution of occupations and their engagement to the so-called unclean occupations. To sum up this argument, the major fields of agents through which Dalits face social exclusion is that in the civil and cultural spheres, untouchables face discrimination and exclusion in use of public services, roads, temples, water bodies, and institutions delivering services of education, health, and other public services. In the political sphere, untouchables face discrimination on the account of their political rights, participation in decision-making process, due to physical and residential segregation, the social exclusion on account of notion of untouchability. They suffer from general social exclusion. Since there is a societal mechanism to regulate and enforce the customary norms, rules of the caste system, the untouchables generally face opposition in form of social and economic boycott, violence, which acts as a general deterrent to their right to development. Amongst the marginalized groups, although scheduled castes and scheduled tribes are worse off in terms of deprivation, caste identity in particular has fundamentally worked against the scheduled castes in many spheres of social life in mainstream society. Unlike the scheduled tribes, the scheduled castes mostly live in mixed caste villages in mainstream society and remain vulnerable to discriminatory practices based on group identity. despite the constitutional safeguards and specific legislative measures to address the issue of discrimination based on the caste identity, the exclusionary nature of social relations continue to persist as far as the scheduled castes are considered. The prevalence of caste-based discrimination and other related oppressive behaviors often restrict their access to opportunities and push them into a morass of socially excluded life. There are numerous research studies and experimental accounts to suggest that the lack of equal access to essential public resources and services among the scheduled castes is not always accidental, but an outcome of active social discrimination at a societal as well as institutional level. Historically, the caste system classified people into their occupation and status. Each caste has a specific place in hierarchy and social status. Dr. B.R. Ambedkar described caste as a hoary institution, which is familiar and unexplained in nature. Ambedkar challenged some of the established scholars of the time, particularly on the category of caste. According to French Indologist Emile Senart, for him, caste is a close, traditional, and independent organization which comprises chief and council, in which the members are linked to similar occupations that they gather during festivals. At the same time, they have a particular notion of marriage, notions of food, and ceremonial pollutions. Senat argued that they possess a particular jurisprudence which maintains power through penalties over its members, and those who do not obey these codes of law are excluded from the group. On the other hand, John Nesfield interprets caste as a class of community which disowns any connection with other class and can neither intermarry, eat, or drink with any but the persons of their own community. Herbert Risley argued that caste may be defined as a collection of families or groups of families bearing a common name, which usually denotes a mythical ancestor. S.V. Gatker defines the caste as a social group having two characteristics. One, membership is confined to those who are born members of include all persons are so born. And the two, the members are forbidden for any inexplorable social law to marry outside the group. Ambedkar asserted that the aforementioned views on caste reduced the caste into an isolated unit and failed to explore relations within the whole system of caste. Ambedkar questions Senat's view by asserting that idea of pollution is linked to priestly ceremonialism and it will remain a feature of caste till caste maintains its religious flavor. Ambedkar also scrutinizes Nesfield for not analyzing the exclusiveness related to the caste and lamented that Nesfield has mistaken the effect for the cause. For Ambedkar, Gatker misconceived the prohibition of intermarriage and membership by auto agency as two separate characteristics, which are the observe and reverse sides of the same model. Because if you prohibit intermarriage, the result is that you limit membership to those born within the group. Despite too many disagreements with Gatker, Ambedkar appreciates him as one scholar who tried to explore the caste system and emphasized on prohibition of intermarriage as an essence of caste. After delineating the core principle of caste, Ambedkar, in one of his path-breaking undelivered speech of 1935, he said that caste is not a physical object. Caste is a notion and it is a state of mind. The destruction of caste does not therefore mean the destruction of physical barrier. It means a notional change. However, since 19th century, the link between caste and occupation has become less rigid as it became easier for the people to change occupations. This change has accelerated with the economic boom which has taken place in India since the early 90s. The legally, untouchability in India was prohibited by the constitution. And to give an effect to this article, Parliament enacted an untouchability in 1955. Based on that, Article 17, abolition of untouchability. Its provisions are implemented by the respective state governments and the union territories and coordinated by the Government of India. The Act provides penalties for enforcing untouchability or any disability arising therefore, like, for instance, preventing a person from entering a place of public worship and offering prayers or taking water from sacred tank or well or a spring. To make the provisions of this Act more stringent, the Act was amended in 1976 and also renamed as Protection of Civil Rights Act 1955, was renamed Protection of Civil Rights Act of 1977 to carry out the provisions of this Act. As the cases of atrocities on scheduled castes and scheduled tribes were not covered under these provisions of Act of 1955 or 1976, Parliament passed another Act in 1989 to make the measures to prevent the atrocities committed against them. This Act, known as Scheduled Castes and Scheduled Tribes Prevention of Atrocities Act of 1989. And this Act went on for amendments and amendments and amendments. Finally, in 2015, it was completed its amendments. And for carrying out the provisions of this Act, Government of India notified the rules. The number of cases registered under the PCR Act is an indication of continued perpetuation of untouchability, violation of human rights, committing atrocities, and discrimination. The cases also go unreported owing to the dependency of the Dalit communities for their livelihood and the fear of backlash by the perpetrators as they hold social, economic, and institutional power in the area. Dalit victims also do not receive any kind of support from the police or administration to register human rights violation against them. From its review with the various state governments, the SC/ST Commission viewed that a large number of cases of atrocities go unregistered, and mainly because the reluctance on part of police officers to register the cases. The notions of purity and pollution have been particularly resilient in relation to drinking water resources. The study also confirms that the fact that and found the persistent conflicts were reported with regard to drinking water, while complete denial of access to particular water source, that could be a well, a tank, a tube well, and so on, designated as upper caste water source was quite common. And what was even more common was that imposition of differential behavior of Dalits, on Dalits. In over 1/3 of, that is 36% of the villages surveyed, the Dalits were denied entry into village shops. They usually, all these details that you can get, 2006 published book, Untouchability in Rural India. They usually meant that Dalits were not allowed to come up to counters like other customers, but were made to wait outside or some distance from the shop. In 1/3 of the villages, the tea shops discriminate against the Dalits by asking them to be seated separately, and the widespread of practice of two-glass system. The social status of the caste provide services such as washermen and barbers is dependent on their denying the service of Dalits. Such denial of services to Dalits is always demanded by the non-Dalits. Discrimination by washermen and barbers found to be present as many as 47% of the villages they studied. It is not one single state or one single district that they studied. They studied 565 villages across 11 states. So what are the types or indicators of social exclusion? The caste system based on division of people into social groups in which civil, cultural, economic rights of each caste is predetermined on hierarchy ascribed by birth. The assignment of civil and economic rights is unequal and hierarchical, and the most important feature, it provision for a regulatory mechanism to enforce social and economic organizations through the instruments of social ostracism, and the caste system is reinforced further with a justification and support from philosophical elements of, in the Hindu religion or religious texts. Caste at the top of social order enjoys more rights at the expense of those located at the bottom of the caste hierarchy, who have fewer economic and social rights. The untouchables, who are at the bottom of the caste hierarchy, suffer the most from unequal assignments and entitlements of rights. The untouchables suffer from social exclusion and discrimination involving rights which include civil, cultural, and economic rights, and particularly the notion of untouchability, which is unique to the untouchable caste only as they considered impure, polluting, and unfit for social association and interrelation with castes above. The indicators and forms of stigmatization that exclusion takes has been described as taking the historical case of Peshwa rule by Dr. Ambedkar in his paper on annihilation of caste. He points out that under the rule of Peshwas in Maratha country, the untouchables were not allowed to use public streets, and if a Hindu was coming along, lest he should pollute the Hindu by his even shadow. The untouchable were required to have a black thread either on their wrist or neck as a sign or mark to prevent Hindus from getting themselves polluted by this touch by mistake. In Pune, the early 20th century, in the capital of Peshwas, untouchables were required to carry, strung from their waist, a broom to sweep away the dust he treaded on the lest a Hindu walking on the same path be polluted. The discrimination in schools take a form of denial of access to education, skill development among the Dalit children. This reduces the quality of human resources and employability for quality jobs and force them to rely on low-earning manual wage labor in farming or non-farming activities. Denial of education leads to increased illiteracy, low functional literacy, high dropout rates, and limited skill development. And discrimination in education also leads to high representation in menial jobs, low wages, low income, and ultimately high poverty. The denial of admission into the primary school health centers, primary health centers through discriminatory access to primary health centers, private health providers may take following forms of denial of visiting Dalit homes, denial of giving information about the health facilities, lack of care leading to requirement of private medical attention, and loss of income, delay in delivery of child, leading to complications and private medical attention. In the political spheres, Dalits are denied political rights such as rights and means to participate in the exercise of political rights, denial of justice, freedom of expression, and the rule of law. The Constitution of India has made certain provisions to empower the Dalits politically, but exclusion has denied them active political participation. Political parties give a representation to weak candidates from a Dalit community for election. In the reserved political constituency, where the deciding people will not be the Dalits himself, but the upper caste voter who purposely elect a candidate who can represent the interests of the upper caste and not the Dalits. Due to this, the Dalits can't elect a representative who can participate in on their behalf in the policy making. The impact of exclusion has made Dalits a vulnerable community, which is aggravated by the dependency of the Dalits on the so-called upper caste communities. In the contemporary scenario, due to the impact of exclusion of Dalits, they are subjected to social, economic, and political exclusion. A study of the book called Untouchables in Rural India, covering 565 villages in 11 states, has revealed the different forms in which the untouchability and social exclusion have mutated and manifest in spite of being officially criminalized by the Constitution of India. In spite of in 37.8% of the villages, Dalit students are made to sit separately in government schools. In 27.5% of the villages, Dalits are prevented from entering into police stations. In 25% of the villages, Dalits prevented from entering into ration shops. In 33% of the villages, public health workers refuse to visit Dalit homes. In about 14% of the villages, Dalits are not permitted to enter Panchayat building. In 12% of the villages, Dalits are forced to form separate lines at polling booths. In 48% of the villages, Dalits are denied access to water resources. In market access, 35% of the villages, Dalits are banned from selling or produced in the local market. 47% of the villages, milk cooperatives prevent Dalits from selling milk, and 25% of them from buying milk. In about 24% of the villages, Dalits are paid low wages than the non-Dalits and work longer hours and delayed wages, suffer from verbal and physical abuse. In 37% of the villages, Dalit workers are paid wages from a distance to avoid physical contact. In the religious spaces, 64% of the villages, Dalits are restricted from entering into Hindu temples. In more than 50% of the villages, Dalits are prevented from access to cremation grounds. In private spheres, 73% of the villages, Dalits are not permitted to enter non-Dalit homes. And in 35% of the villages, Dalits are denied entry into village shops. The questions persist as to why Dalits have poor access to resources, which directly and indirectly determine the levels of income and capabilities to secure other sources of income. Why is the ownership of agricultural land and non-land capital assets low compared with the non-SC and ST? Why are the unemployment rates are high, particularly among the Dalits compared to the non-Dalits? Why are the daily wage earnings of Dalits in non-farm activities are low compared to non-Dalits? Why is the literacy rate and education levels are much lower when compared with non-Dalits? To conclude, from the preceding discussion, we may conclude that the concept of social exclusion is a process of blocking the development of marginalized communities and disintegrating people and communities into mainstream development, which a series of institutionalized social systems. The most affected population is Dalits, who lag in the spheres of developmental activities. Dr. Ambedkar, therefore, with his visionary mission, provided a comprehensive framework for the development of the people in general and Dalits in particular. Given the complexity and crucial relevance of these issues to larger groups of people, the issue we are presently discussing assumes a greater significance. The establishment of social exclusion programs and of the study in various institutions holds the promise of more specialized knowledge to overcome the challenges posed to the government, especially the post-colonial era. Even if the government action is tardy, as it often, such knowledge matters because exclusion from the domain of knowledge means preserving exclusion. The field of research it opens up allows for a critical re-examination of current theories and frameworks of understanding of social exclusion, though such possibility is only gestured in this paper. Given the diversities of process and experiences of social exclusion in Indian context, has an immense potential to contribute to critical broadening of the field of social exclusion. And I thank you all for the patient hearing. And I would not mind to take up any questions that if you have and any student have.
Thank you, sir, for your insightful session. Now we are opening up for question and answer round. So students can put their question in the chat box. So, sir, we have first question.
Yeah.
What socio-economic policy is appropriate for reducing poverty and social exclusion in contemporary social market economics?
See, we have the policies. We don't need any new policy. Whatever the policies that we have, and if the execution of implementation is done, it solves most of the problems. We don't need new executive orders. We have the ones that we already have. If we implement, is enough.
Okay, thank you, sir. So,
Yeah.
second question is, Is it possible to have a strong civil society during a severe economic crisis with high levels of poverty and social exclusion?
See, that's what exactly my second part of my presentation is like. Why the poverty, illiteracy, and like, just look at any of the census report of any year of any state. Why is that illiteracy, poverty are more where this population is thickly concentrated? Why not others? Because the first thing is that the school, the very first step, they don't let these children, or the student teacher doesn't pay any attention, since they are expected to sit far away from the mainstream class or the last bench, if at all the benches are available. So you would see how they are discouraged to even enter. And the child neurosense, the confidence levels will be hit hard at the very young age, so that henceforth the child denies even to go to school. So this is how the low esteem, low self-esteem, and for the child develops.
Now we have few questions from panel of students. So
Yeah.
the first question is, how to create a better educational institution and workforce for specially abled people who are mostly socially excluded from society?
See, the Constitution makes that you have all these the acts of social protection measures and things, but it doesn't reach them. Because if it reaches them properly, look at now, as Dr. Gopinath mentioned, that like the Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav and 75 years of independence and things and all, like, why is that? In any field, when we have the reservations are implemented for at least for 70 years, which field that they completed the reservation implementation? Except for two, only the MLAs and MPs. Now, why not even the grade A of office positions? Not even 10% that we could fill them. Who failed it? Is it the Dalits who could not reach that level, or the state which could not make them or bring them into that level? So it's the state implementing authorities. And suppose if you see 3 years back, there was a story in Bihar that the upper caste health worker throwing a needle into a child's bum from a 3 feet distance because she doesn't want to touch the child to inject. What else can be inhuman than that you could ask for in the 21st century and after 75 years of independence? You have lots and lots of studies conducted and published. If whoever is interested with any specific area, you could just consult anytime. And there are lots of literature that is available.
Okay, thank you, sir. So the next question is, a socially inclusive society should consist of a great education. What education reforms should be brought in at early child development?
You don't need any new reforms, sir, or whoever is a student. First, you let them enter into the school. Give them an equal opportunity to study. We don't need a new reform at all. Let them enter into the school first. Let them enter into the college first. No new reforms are required. We just have to, the state of mind. We just come out of our, the state of mind that they don't study, they don't work hard, they don't, come out of that. Get them let them get an opportunity, and they prove. Examples in history are there too many for you. There's one example, K.R. Narayanan. I'm sure some of you are familiar with the name. And after his master's in English literature. And when he applied for an assistant professor position, they offered him University of Kerala offered him a clerk position. What does it mean? And who did his PhD with Harold Lasky? This is the state of mind. You cannot expect them to be a higher seats. Come out of that state of minds first.
The next question is, sir, is SC and ST Act have fulfilled in removing the social inequalities?
No, because this is never implemented, my dear. It's never thoroughly implemented. If invariably the atrocity or human right violation will be done by an upper caste, and they will be dominant in that local area. First of all, police will decline to file an FIR. Secondly, if they stress more for the FIR, then the ostracism will begin. They will not be provided, the wage labor. They will not be employed in their farms. So this is how the ostracism begins. So it's not that like we don't have acts, we don't need new acts. But the thorough implementation, that is important.
Okay,
Yes.
sir. So the next question is, how can better banking system help in an socially inclusive economy?
See, the banking system has its own norms. Let me give you one example. The Tata Nano Company, on the one hand, and we have the Safai Karmachari Rehabilitation Scheme. In the Safai Karmachari Rehabilitation Scheme, each family were given 1 lakh rupee to rehabilitate and lead meaningful or a better way of life and getting a new employment and things like that. Out of this 1 lakh, 30,000 is rebate and 70,000 rupees they are expected to pay with 11% of interest. Pay back to the bank or the government, whichever the state. And look at the interest rate, 11%. What happens in the process is that by the time they relocate themselves to the nearby town or whatever it is, that they will relocation and restructuring the house or hut, whatever it is, that 70,000 rupees is gone within a year or two. And what remains with them is that loan of 70,000 rupees with 11% interest that they have to pay. And the Tata Nano Company, on the other hand, in the process of shifting from Bengal to Gujarat, government has given 10,000 crores of bailout loan with an interest of 0.002. Look at the contrast. So the banks are there, but when they are already, most of them are poor, what will they show as a guarantee? On the other hand, you have, dozens of people who could get away thousands of crores of money and settle down easily abroad. And you have many cases. I don't need to give you an example for that, I'm sure.
So, sir, due to paucity of time, we will only take one more last question.
Yes.
So the last question is there a relation between digital inclusion and social inclusion?
What do you mean by that? Digital inclusion?
Sir, this question is asked by a student.
Okay. Look, I'm talking about the social inclusion.
I'm just trying to... Sir, he must be talking about the digital divide.
Okay. So I'm talking about how these groups are vulnerable in different fields and how they face the exclusion. And I am not very much familiar with this digital inclusion or a digital divide. Maybe our Dr. Gopinath Pillai sir will explain it more.
I'm not The only question is, I am a digitally challenged person, as far as digital literacy is concerned. But definitely, it's a natural corollary of what you have said, that
Yeah.
people who don't have access to schooling, I mean, those who are debarred from entering schools, it's
Yes.
so pathetic that to think of digital inclusion it's a far-fetched imagination. First, let's make our villages digitally
Yes.
equipped. Then only you can talk of this digital inclusion. So that's a far-fetched.
Yeah.
Looking at the basic ideas that you have given us, I mean, it's a far-fetched thing. So digital inclusion will come once you start physically including these marginalized groups into the mainstream. That is my understanding.
Yeah.
But thank you very much, sir. And I will
Wonderful.
request the students to pass a
Yeah.
word of thanks to you,
Thank you.
because they are the ones who conduct this.
Yes.
We are empowering our students to manage things,
It's good. It's wonderful idea, sir, to bring them into the mainstream.
So Shivani, please.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much, sir, for this enlightening and very insightful session. Now, I would like to invite Aniket for vote of thanks.
I would maintain that thanks are the highest form of thought, and that gratitude is happiness doubled by wonder. I, Aniket Pandey, consider the occasion as an honor and privilege to extend the vote of thanks and put my gratitude into words. On behalf of Civil Society, Department of Political Science, Sri Guru Nanak Dev Khalsa College, and all the students, I would like to thank Dr. Yagati Chinna Rao sir for being here and enlightening us with his pearls of wisdom and experience. Sir, it was indeed an insightful session for all of us. Your willingness to share your time and expertise is really appreciable. We appreciate you making time in your busy schedule to speak to us and showing your gesture towards our college. I would also like to extend my heartfelt gratitude to convener of Civil Society, Dr. Gopinath Pillai sir, and Head of Department of Political Science, Dr. Indrajit Singh sir, for his valuable contribution, guidance, and encouragement in organizing this webinar. I owe special gratitude to all the faculty members for their support, vision, and commitment. I must not forget to thank the organizing team who contributed in organizing the webinar until the last days. Last but not the least, I would like to thank all the participants for showing their interest in this webinar. Once again, I would thank everyone for making this webinar a success. Thank you.
Unmute yourself, sir.
Thank you very much, sir.
Right. Thank you. Bye-bye.
We'll all.
Right. I'll take your leave. I have a class to go.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Thank you so much, sir. Now, I request participants to kindly fill the attendance cum feedback form.